Consumption, the consumer spending part, and investment, business spending, which has also been strong.
We produce stuff, we get stuff done, and we put people to work.
A stark contrast to the deep pandemic days when there were too many people chasing too few goods and not enough workers to get it all done. Julie Smith, an economist at Lafayette College, says a key element to achieving balance is people spending not too little, not too much.
I think a lot of that has to do with how they are feeling about the economy.
And the latest consumer confidence numbers out this week say
people are generally feeling okay to positive about the economy.
Okay to positive might not sound like a glowing review, but it might just be the review the Fed needs, because it could mean, for instance, that consumers feel confident enough about jobs to keep spending, but not so confident that they're job hopping for raises, which increases inflation. Jim Wilcox, an economist at UC Berkeley, says the equilibrium of this moment, it means consumer spending has fallen into that sweet spot.
The kinds of consumer growth we're seeing lately are not going to reignite inflation.
Spending that's sort of even keeled allows the Fed to relax a little, at least for now.
They do not have to hurry to lower interest rates a lot, and nor are they under much pressure to stop lowering interest rates.
Which, he says, puts the Fed on track to cut by 25 basis points next week. I'm Kristen Schwab for Marketplace.
Wall Street today, GDP, SHMEDP. Traders took issue with a couple of tech company earnings reports. We'll have the details, when we do the numbers. Today being the Wednesday before the first Friday of the month, we got some jobs data from the payroll company ADP this morning, from which we learned wage increases have slowed. Again, ADP says year over year, the median wage gain is 4.6% for people who stay in the same job, 6.2% for people who switch, should you be curious. The rate of increase has been slowing for a couple of years now, which kind of makes sense. It's one of the side effects of slowing inflation. But here we sit at the far end of 2024. Inflation is mostly dead, and the rate of wage gains is still falling. Marketplace's Kelly Wells asked some economists just how low it's likely to go and what that might mean.
The actual wage increase number isn't all that important, says Bankrate's senior economic analyst Mark Hamrick.
The magic number is positive with respect to real earnings being earnings adjusted for inflation.
Right now, it is positive because those wage increases have been bigger than price increases. Inflation is around 2.5%. Wage gains, even for folks who stay in the same job, almost twice that.
Wages have outpaced inflation for a year and a half now.
That's because it's still a workers' market, says Nicole Smith. She's chief economist at Georgetown's Center on Education and the Workforce.
Those workers still have the upper hand to make decisions about moving or staying and what types of wages they will accept.
Smith says demand for workers, think job openings, is still greater than the supply, think unemployed people.
If you're an employer, you still have to play it safe. Because if you drop those wages too substantially, you run the risk of losing your employees.
So wages are growing faster than inflation, even though wage gains have fallen. Dean Baker says that's a win-win. He's a senior economist at the Center for Economic and Policy Research who says today's job market is a far cry from what we saw 2 years ago.
If wages go up rapidly enough, that will be passed on in prices, and we were seeing that. So what's happened is the labor market has normalized. It's still strong.
Perhaps even better news, Baker says he thinks this 2% gap of wage gains over inflation could stick around.
If you could point to a period of 2% sustained real wage growth, you really have to go back to the 60s. So things look pretty good right now.
Tomorrow, we'll get a look at the employment cost index for the third quarter of this year, a major indicator of economic health for the Fed as it weighs future interest rates. I'm Kaylee Wells for Marketplace.
In a lot of ways, as Kristen and Kaylee were just telling us, the economy right now seems like it's headed in the right direction. You can recite the specifics as well as I can. But just because things look good doesn't mean this economy doesn't have any problems that the pandemic both caused and highlighted. Labor shortages, supply chain issues, higher costs, of course, thanks to inflation, also tighter profit margins. As Marketplace's Justin Ho reports, for a lot of small business owners, this economy right now feels a little bit off kilter.
Like a lot of restaurant owners, Matt Hetrick has had trouble filling positions at his 2 locations around Annapolis, Maryland. He says over the last few years, even after raising wages, he's had to get creative, running shifts with fewer managers and cutting down on prep work.
Just something as simple as a French fry, right? There's a lot of places that will cut their own French fries, that will fry them several times, do the whole thing. And then there's also the ability to buy frozen fries out of a bag,
which maybe wouldn't go over well in Belgium, but requires a lot less labor. Hetrick says making adjustments like these is part of the job. But what's difficult, he says, is that many of the challenges that he's had to adjust to over the last few years have subsided a bit, but they haven't gone away.
So you have inflation, you have worker shortages, you have access to capital shortages. It doesn't seem to be ending and getting back to a place where it's a reasonable set of challenges.
Hetrick says all that adapting can be exhausting because it's not like he's correcting a tactical error he made, like opening up a business in the wrong location or designing the wrong menu. Instead, the challenges he's dealing with are economic headwinds, just like big companies talk about in their quarterly reports, in which he, as a business owner, has no control over.
You can't control how many workers there are in the United States and where they are and what wages they'll take. And so it feels broken because you're adjusting to things that you weren't doing wrong.
Supply chain issues have been sticking around too. Catherine Reynolds handles imports for Palmetto Tile Distributors in South Carolina.
We're starting to see the effects of all the things that have been going on in the Red Sea, the attacks and the container delays. I feel like it's finally starting to catch up with the industry overall.
Reynolds says then there was Hurricane Helene and the port strike. She says every supply chain delay pushes up her costs because shipping companies add fees and surcharges for labor and fuel.
It just seems we just go from one kind of disaster to the next. That's just sustaining these price levels, unfortunately.
Another challenge, Reynolds says, is that demand for tile among her homebuilder clients has been fairly sluggish. She says that could be because of the hurricane or because people are nervous about the election. But a big factor holding her customers back, she says, is the cost of building supplies and construction loans.
And as rates haven't come down like they thought they would, and basic supplies to build a house, like wood and plumbing, pipes, all of that have stayed higher, they've had to scale back their tile budget considerably.
That means most businesses don't have much leverage to jack up their prices. Last week, a Federal Reserve survey found that businesses in a number of Fed districts said input costs, think labor, supplies, and those shipping surcharges, are rising faster than they can raise retail prices.
You can't realistically raise a price if you're going to be competing with several hundred other retailers selling the same exact thing at a lower price.
That's Jeff Cayley. He owns Worldwide Cyclery, a mountain bike store in Newbury Park, California. He says given the limits on his ability to raise prices, rising expenses are taking a toll.
That's just making our business a lot harder to be profitable and a lot harder to operate and run profitably than it used to be just back 5 years ago.
So he's been cutting back on shipping supplies and how much AC and heating the business uses. He also let go about 10% of his staff. The net result, he says, isn't great for anybody.
I feel as if we're not offering as good of value to our customers and to our staff as we were in 2019. And that's a result of just having to cut corners and pinch pennies everywhere we can in order to keep hanging on.
Cayley says Worldwide Cyclery is still doing all right, but doing business right now is just harder than it was before the pandemic. I'm Justin Ho for Marketplace.
Coming up.
You know, we're not going to maybe look to upgrade anything this year.
Sometimes you just got to hold off, right? First, though, sure, yes, let's do the numbers. Dow Industrial's down 91 points today, 0.2%, 42,141. The Nasdaq off 104 points, about 0.5%, 18,607. The S&P 500 ticked down 19 points, about 0.3% there, 58 and 13. Google parent company Alphabet posted comfortable quarterly earnings. Profit was up 35% in its cloud business. Alphabet's big spending on artificial intelligence seems to have been a good bet for the tech giant. Google invested some $13 billion on capital projects like data centers in an effort to catch up in, yes, the AI race. Alphabet shares climbed 2.8%. Rival Microsoft gained about 0.1% today. Kristen Schwab is telling us about consumer spending and GDP. So some big retailers, shall we? Walmart subtracted 0.4% today. Costco slid 0.9%. Target went the other way, picked up 0.4%. German automaker Volkswagen is having a rough weekend after announcing a 42% drop in year-over-year earnings. The company is struggling due to rising costs in Europe, also because of decline in demand for its vehicles over in China. It's also asking workers to take a 10% pay cut in order to stave off layoffs. Bonds down, yield on the 10-year T-note, 4.3%. You're listening to Marketplace.
Marketplace Numbers is supported by Rubrik, cyber resilience for unstoppable business. Rubrik.com. Marketplace is supported by the John Templeton Foundation, funding interdisciplinary research and catalyzing conversations to inspire awe and wonder. Dive deeply into the wonders of the universe at templeton.org. And by Clear Channel Outdoor. Clear Channel's nationwide network of billboards and data-driven solutions help businesses big and small build brand awareness and influence consumer behavior. Learn more at billboardsforbusiness.com. And by Odoo, management software designed to unite every aspect of business into one simple platform. Odoo aims to take businesses to the next level. ODOO.com. Everything any business will ever need.
WNYC supporters include Suffs, the Broadway musical about the women who devoted their lives to the right to vote. Their story is a reminder that the glass ceiling isn't going to shatter itself. Suffs, on Broadway through January 5th only. Tickets at suffsmusical.com.
On the next All of It, MF Doom was one of rap's most mysterious figures. He performed in a mask and created multiple cult classic albums while obscuring his identity. When he died several years ago, the desire to learn who he really was became more urgent. We'll learn more about his life from S.H. Fernando, the author of The Chronicles of Doom, Unraveling Rap's Masked Iconoclast. I'm Allison Stewart. Join us for All of It, weekdays at noon on WNYC.
You're listening to Marketplace on WNYC. In the 7 o'clock hour of All Things Considered, the upcoming election could reshape the U.S. Supreme Court, or not, depending on retirements, deaths, or other unforeseen events. We'll have that and much more at 7 o'clock. Stay tuned.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Ryssdal. We love our cars, we Americans do. What we don't love so much is the money we have to spend to own and drive them. Gas, obviously. The prices of some of them also, obviously. And lately, even as inflation overall has been falling, insurance and maintenance costs have gone through the roof. Marketplace's Mitchell Hartman has our story.
Navy Federal Credit Union puts out a quarterly cost of car ownership index, crunching together 11 different expenses, from new and used vehicle prices to gas and regular upkeep. Economist Robert Frick says since 2020, the overall cost is up 38%, while the Consumer Price Index is only up 21%.
It's kind of like we can't catch a break with cars.
Vehicle prices soared early in the pandemic, with messed up supply chains and empty dealer lots. Now, says analyst Carl Brower at iSeeCars.com, prices have leveled off, but they're still
much higher than they were pre-COVID. There's still enough people out there who are ready to buy a new car that you're not really getting a deal.
For automakers, there's little incentive to lower prices, says Garrett Nelson at CFRA Research.
They entered into a new labor contract with the union, UAW, last November, and so they're being pinched by much higher labor costs.
Also, drivers are now getting dinged by soaring insurance rates, says Robert Frick, up more than 11% last year. How come?
A lot of cars were wrecked from flooding and fires. Cars are more expensive to repair because of electronics. The people who work fixing cars, they got a big pay raise.
All this is causing consumers to pull back, says Kayla Brune at Morning Consult. For middle-income folks,
trading down to cheaper cars.
while lower income consumers,
those that already have cars, increasingly saying that they're not confident in their ability to make payments.
anyone who bought when the market peaked and wants to sell now is also in trouble, says Carl Brower, with used vehicle prices falling.
Automobiles aren't particularly a good asset, but because they were for about 3 years there, people got a false sense of reality.
He says a lot of people owe more on the vehicle they bought at top dollar than it's worth today. I'm Mitchell Hartman for Marketplace.
We've been talking on and off the past 2 or 3 years about the extended moment that organized labor's been having. From individual Starbucks stores to the United Auto Workers to the machinists at Boeing, and now the WNBA. The Women's National Basketball Players Association made huge gains in their 2020 collective bargaining agreement. It raised the average pay of an WNBA player into the six figures for the first time. It guaranteed new benefits like parental leave, and it required the NBA, which owns more than half of the W, to increase its marketing spending. But after an historic 2024 season, the Players Union is opting out of that old CBA, and a year from this week is the deadline to find something new. Marketplace's Savannah Marr has more.
3.3 million people tuned into the New York Liberty's overtime championship win against the Minnesota Lynx in this year's WNBA Finals.
28 years in the making!
It was the most viewers in 25 years. Keitra Armstrong, a professor of sport management at the University of Michigan, says the W has been on a sharp rise since about 2021.
But what we saw in the last year, it just catapulted them, I think, to a new level.
WNBA games smashed viewership records. Teams sold more tickets and merchandise than ever. And the league inked a landmark $200 million a year media rights deal. With all this money pouring into the league, Armstrong says it's not surprising the athletes want to revisit their contract.
If you're a part of producing that product, this is a unique moment. This is a unique strategic window of opportunity to capitalize on the energy and the synergy and the momentum.
Terry Carmichael Jackson, executive director of the Women's National Basketball Players Association, says the athletes are eager to get to the table. Even the stars of this year's finals.
Nafisa Collier, Brianna Stewart, I had separate calls with them, round about game 3, going into game 4, going to game 5. They're saying, okay, when do we get the results of the vote? We're ready.
At the top of their contract wish list, higher players' salaries.
We're in a hard cap system. And when I mean hard cap, I mean hard, really pretty restrictive.
Where even superstar rookies can't crack six figures. And some of the best players in the world play overseas in the offseason to supplement their income.
We've got to address that.
And Carmichael Jackson says the next CBA should ensure that players share in the league's growing profits. Under the current agreement, players split less than 10% of WNBA revenue.
We've got to look at a revenue share provision that comes a little bit closer to what the NBPA and the NBA have,
where players get more like a 50% cut of league profits. The WNBA Players Union will also bargain for better family planning, childcare, and retirement benefits, and higher professional standards for things like practice facilities. The league didn't respond to an interview request. But Jada Mumju, who studies the business of sports at the University of New Haven, says these negotiations come at a busy time of expansion.
The league is moving from 40 games to 44 games, moving finals from 5 games to 7 games, moving from 12 teams to 15.
With the first of 3 new teams launching in San Francisco next year.
All of these add to the league's inventory. These are all assets that they are selling to corporate partners.
Mumju says this should help the Players Union make their case and prevent an impasse.
Maybe selfishly, I really hope that there's no stoppage, that we can continue watching the exciting games.
Mumju has been watching crowds grow at Connecticut Sun games these last few years. She says the W doesn't want to see that momentum stall with a players' strike. I'm Savannah Marr for Marketplace.